From New Orleans Public Television, this is Democracy Now!
A shutdown will have a very real economic impact on real people.
Government shutdown. It's the first in 17 years. 800,000 federal workers will be furloughed. More than 1 million others will be asked to work without pay. We'll go to Washington to speak with Mother Jones reporter Tim Murphy. Then, as we broadcast from the Gulf Coast, site of the worst offshore oil spill in U.S. history, BP is back in court, accused of lying about how much oil was leaking during the 2010 Gulf of Mexico oil spill. And after a heated meeting Monday night, a local levee board vice president loses his post for supporting a lawsuit against 97 oil and gas companies.
If nothing is done, according to the State Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, statewide flood damages over time will rise to an average of $23.4 billion a year for the wealthiest industry in the world. To shift the burden of many of these costs to the citizens of under Louisiana is unfair, to say the least.
We'll speak with the ousted Flood Board member, John Berry. He's an award-winning historian, author of Rising Tide. And we'll be joined by Monique Hardin with Advocates for Environmental Human Rights here in New Orleans. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. government has begun a partial shutdown for the first time in 17 years after Congress failed to break a partisan deadlock by a midnight deadline. Some 800,000 federal workers are to be furloughed and more than 1 million others will be asked to work without pay. The shutdown was spearheaded by Tea Party Republicans who backed a House bill tying continued government funding to a 1-year delay of the Affordable Care Act and the repeal of a tax to pay for it. The Democratic-controlled Senate insisted on funding the government through November 15th without conditions. On Monday, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said House Republicans have failed the nation.
As we gather here, right near Statuary Hall, I'm reminded that President Washington, when he was leaving office, cautioned against political parties that were at war with their own government. And here we are tonight. But you do not use the threat of shutting down government to try to advance your policy agenda. That's just not the way it works. And that's what is called irresponsible, and that is why this is the Tea Party government shutdown.
Despite the government shutdown, a key Obamacare initiative begins today. Individuals seeking health insurance under the new program can now enroll online through new federal marketplaces and state ones. On Monday, President Obama said he won't negotiate over the enactment of his signature health care law.
Let me be clear about this. An important part of the Affordable Care Act takes effect tomorrow, no matter what Congress decides to do today. The Affordable Care Act is moving forward. That funding is already in place. You can't shut it down. This is a law that passed both houses of Congress, a law that bears my signature, a law that the Supreme Court upheld as constitutional, a law that voters chose not to repeal last November.
We'll have more on the government shutdown after headlines. President Obama has renewed the threat of military force against Iran just days after speaking by phone to Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. In an appearance with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, Obama said the U.S. reserves the right to launch military strikes should diplomacy fail. Netanyahu then called on Obama to maintain sanctions against Iran and even tighten them should it make nuclear advances.
Is that we can resolve this diplomatically, but as President of the United States, I've said before, and I will repeat, that we take no options off the table, including military actions, in terms of making sure we do not have nuclear weapons in Iran that will destabilize the region and potentially threaten the United States of America. success. And in fact, individuals try to believe that if Iran continues to advance in appropriate negotiations, the sanctions should be strengthened.
President Obama's phone call with Rouhani on Friday marked the highest level contact between the U.S. and Iran since 1979. In response to Netanyahu's comments, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said, quote, "We have seen nothing from him but lies and actions to deceive and scare." United Nations chemical weapons experts are arriving in Syria today to launch their mission to destroy the Assad regime's stockpile. The mandate was established in the UN Security Council resolution adopted last week. It sets a timeline of mid-2014 for the complete elimination of Syria's chemical arsenal. In an address to the UN General Assembly Monday, Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallem continued the regime's denial of using chemical weapons, claiming foreign governments are supplying them to Syrian rebels.
However, there remains the challenge that is facing all of us, whether those who are supplying terrorists with these types of weapons will abide by their legal commitments, since terrorists who used poisonous gases in my country have received chemical agents from regional and Western countries that are well known to all of us.
The arrival of the UN disarmament experts comes as a team of inspectors have completed their second mission investigating alleged chemical weapons attacks in Syria. A final report is expected later this month. The latest disclosures from the leaks of whistleblower Edward Snowden show the NSA is storing the internet metadata of millions of people for up to a year, regardless of whether or not they're linked to an investigation. The stored metadata includes vast personal records of internet use, including browsing history and account passwords. The online information is stored in a database codenamed Marina. 33 people have been detained in Texas after crossing into the U.S. from Mexico as part of a protest against record deportations. 33 undocumented youths who lived in the U.S. as children, as well as 3 of their parents, are being held at the Laredo crossing. It's the second time in 3 months that undocumented immigrants have attempted to re-enter the U.S. through an official point of entry. A group called the Dream 9 was held for 3 weeks after trying to enter the U.S. in July. All 9 are now seeking asylum. On Monday, the 30-plus activists marched across a bridge connecting Mexico to the U.S. wearing graduation caps and gowns, chanting "undocumented and unafraid." 2 Marine Corps generals have been forced into early retirement over a security lapse in Afghanistan last year. Major Generals Charles Gurganis and Greg Sturtevant were found to have committed a series of errors that led to a militant attack on a U.S. base, leaving 2 Marines dead and a number of warplanes destroyed. The forced resignations of high-ranking officers are the first in the Marine Corps since the Vietnam War. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has announced the expulsion of 3 U.S. diplomats over what he says are efforts to destabilize his government. In a televised address, Maduro called out the diplomats by name.
3 North American diplomats. I've told foreign minister areas to proceed with their immediate expulsion from the country. They have 48 hours to leave the country. Kelly Keaton, Elizabeth Hunterman, David Wood. Home. Get out of Venezuela. Yankee, go home. Get out of Venezuela.
Venezuelan President Maduro says the 3 met with extreme right opposition groups in a bid to disrupt Venezuela's electrical power grid and sabotage its economy. In a statement, the U.S. Embassy said it completely rejects Maduro's allegations. Thousands of people rallied in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, to mark the 22nd anniversary of the first U.S.-backed ouster of then-President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, Haiti's first democratically elected leader. Monday's protest doubled as a rally against Haitian President Michel Martelly, who is facing pressure to call long-delayed Senate and municipal elections. A pair of hunger-striking Canadians jailed in Egypt for over a month without charge have spoken out for the first time about their ordeal. John Grayson, a Toronto filmmaker, and Tariq Lubani, a doctor, were arrested in Cairo on August 16th. The two were slated to visit Gaza, where Grayson was to film Rubani as he trained emergency room doctors. In a statement smuggled out of their prison cell, Grayson and Rubani said they were arrested after rushing to the scene of a mass shooting by state forces of supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi. Grayson says he began filming the shooting's aftermath while Rubani treated some of the injured. They said they were then, quote, arrested, searched, caged, questioned, interrogated, videotaped with a, quote, Syrian terrorist, slapped, beaten, ridiculed, hotboxed, refused phone calls, stripped, shaved bald, accused of being foreign mercenaries, he said. They've since been held in cockroach-infested jail cells with as many as 36 other people. Over the weekend, Egyptian authorities confirmed their imprisonment has been extended another 45 days, still without charge. A British university is pulling its more than $1 million investment in a military firm that makes parts for armed U.S. drones. The University of Edinburgh announced its divestment from the company Ultra Electronics following a campaign from students and human rights activists. Ultra supplies air navigation systems for the U.S. fleet of Predator and Reaper pilotless drones. Student activists from the City University of New York are continuing protests against the school's hiring of former CIA Director and Military General David Petraeus to teach a class. On Monday, demonstrators rallied outside of a building where Petraeus' course has been relocated following several rallies.
To see the few videos that were released on YouTube, it was terrible, you know, like you see them getting cuffed and kneed and just like pushed around. But it's like, why would they go to these extremes? Why would you need that if it's really just an innocent class?
Yeah, and even believe me, now I'm still not scared. I'm still not scared, and I won't stop until we have Petraeus on ROTC out.
Are facing charges following their arrest at a protest last month. Prior to heading the CIA, Petraeus commanded U.S. troops in the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're on the road in Louisiana, broadcasting from New Orleans Public Television, WLAE. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. government has begun a partial shutdown for the first time in 17 years after Congress failed to break a partisan deadlock by a midnight deadline. The Office of Management and Budget issued orders shortly before the midnight deadline saying that, quote, agencies should not execute plans for an orderly shutdown due to the absence of appropriations. Some 800,000 federal workers are to be furloughed. More than 1 million others will be asked to work without pay. The shutdown was spearheaded by Tea Party conservatives who backed a House bill tying continued government funding to a one-year delay of the Affordable Care Act and the repeal of a tax to pay for it. The Democratic-controlled Senate insisted on funding the government through November 15th without special conditions. Democratic Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid spoke just after midnight.
Madam President, it is embarrassing that these people who are elected to represent the country are representing the Tea Party, the anarchists in the country, and the majority of the Republicans in the House are following every step of the way. This is an unnecessary blow to America, to the economy, middle class, to everyone.
Speaker John Boehner addressed reporters soon after the government shutdown began.
The American people are worried about their job. They're worried about their incomes rising because they're all under pressure. The economy's not growing. Why isn't it growing? One of the issues that's standing in the way is Obamacare. The fact that nobody knows what the rules are, employers scared to death to hire new employees, cutting the hours of many of their current employees, and for what reason? This law is not ready for prime time.
The government shutdown comes as Republicans and Democrats face a nearing deadline to increase the nation's borrowing limit or risk a default on U.S. debts. Republicans had previously threatened to tie their bid for an Obamacare repeal to the debt ceiling vote. Despite the government shutdown, a key initiative of Obamacare begins today. Individuals seeking health insurance under the new program can now enroll online through marketplaces. Well, to talk more about the government shutdown, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Tim Murphy, a reporter at Mother Jones. Tim, welcome to Democracy Now! Please explain what's happened since 12 midnight Eastern Time. What exactly is being shut down?
Well, the short answer is about 20% of the federal government, 800,000 federal workers will show up to work today and be sent home. And that includes 400,000 civilian workers from the Department of Defense. That's the department that's probably gets the most cuts from this. The longer answer is, pretty much, various things that you use in your everyday life will no longer be open to you. People applying for mortgages will have trouble getting that from the federal government. People trying to fill out their taxes will no longer be able to call the IRS to ask basic questions. The Coast Guard is cutting back some of its navigation assistance. New automobile inspections will be curtailed. EPA is closing 94% of its responsibilities for the foreseeable future. There's kind of this perception that the shutdown mostly just affects Washington, D.C., and it really does affect Washington, D.C., but it goes much broader than that.
Some Republicans are demanding their colleagues ditch the shutdown strategy. Republican Congressman Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania said, quote, "It's time to govern. I don't intend to support a fool's errand at this point." Republican Congressman Michael Grimm of New York said the circus created the past few days isn't reflective of mainstream Republicans and projects an image of not being reasonable. The vast majority of Republicans are pretty level-headed and are here to govern, he said. And Republican Congressmember Paul Ryan of Wisconsin, the party's vice presidential nominee in 2012, said, quote, "We have to stay on the right side of public opinion. Shutting down the government puts us on the wrong side," he said. Tim, can you talk about the division among the Republicans?
Yeah, over the last couple of days, there's been this emergence of a block of mostly northeastern or upper Midwestern Republicans who have pushed for, to become kind of a moderating influence within the party. But what we saw last night is that they really are still in the minority, and they're a very small minority. Congressman Peter King of New York, Republican, attempted to lead a small rebellion of his colleagues against John Boehner's proposal to, delay the implementation of the Affordable Care Act by a year, and he got about 20 votes, and that died. So, for the foreseeable future, they really are in the minority of the Republican Party, and what they consider to be mainstream is really anything but. It's those most conservative members of the House, the people that Harry Reid called anarchists last night, who are driving public policy in the House of Representatives.
So, Tim, explain exactly who gets affected by this in this first phase of the shutdown, and when the voting will, reopen government.
Sure. And the deal with the shutdown is it essentially gets worse the longer it goes on. In 1995 and 1996, it went on for 28 days and ended up costing the U.S., I think, about $2 billion in economic losses just because people don't have money and they're not spending it. So you have the 800,000 workers who will be furloughed, and they'll be furloughed without pay. And when the shutdown eventually ends, they'll get that pay. But in the meantime, they're trying to make ends meet. The government did pass an emergency measure to continue paying members of the armed services last night. So they'll still work and they'll still get their pay. But families whose loved ones die in Afghanistan will not get death benefits in that period. Civilian contractors will not, by and large, be showing up to work. The EPA will shut down almost all of its services. The National Zoo will close. Even the Panda Cam that lets you watch, the pandas on a live stream 24 hours a day will shut down. NASA, I think, is furloughing about 97% of its staff. People who depend on the federal government for funding for WIC, food assistance, will not get that. It's up to their state whether they'll get that going forward. Some states have obligations to do that. Some states could probably care less. Heating assistance as the weather gets colder is something that is now up in the air. There's just kind of this wide range of government programs. Head Start, which is a program that has already been kind of really hammered by the sequestration cuts over the last 7 months is going to get further cuts over the next couple of weeks if the shutdown persists, as grants are now put on hold. So, whether you have kids, whether you're a college student, relying on federal student loans or Pell Grants, whether you're a senior citizen, whether you're living in a cold region without heat, this shutdown will affect you.
During MSNBC's Morning Joe on Monday, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin suggested Democrats jam through the Affordable Care Act on a partisan basis.
The reason we're at this point today is because the Democrats jammed through on a 100% partisan basis a huge reform. They didn't do the work of trying to get a bipartisan consensus on how to do health care reform. But of course, come on, Dr. Manuel, please. And of course, Harry Reid hasn't passed an appropriation bill in more than over 2 years. So now he's reading the polls, and rather than keeping us in session, they're going to swat this thing away. Let's face it, they're going to swat it away. We should have swatted this bill away. Harry Reid should have taken a vote. As soon as the House passes, we actually gave ourselves time so we can avert a shutdown. I don't want a shutdown. I don't want the White House trying to work on these enormous financial challenges we have in this nation. But let's face it, the root cause of the problem is that this is an incredibly partisan, very divisive bill, and we're dealing with that right now, and it's a real shame.
Tim Murphy, if you could respond.
Sure. Well, the very brief part is that Democrats have been running on making healthcare affordable and available to everyone for most of the last 4 decades. They won elections, and then they passed it on a party line vote. The longer answer is that this really did reflect the bipartisan consensus at the time. The Affordable Care Act gets its idea for the individual mandate originally from the Conservative Heritage Institute. And prior to the Affordable Care Act, the only place where this has actually been implemented was under Republican Governor Mitt Romney of Massachusetts. This was not really the solution that real liberals wanted. They wanted a single-payer system or something like that. And instead, they spent about a year deliberating in the Senate with a bipartisan group of senators before they finally came up with what we have now as Obamacare. It is essentially a bipartisan creation that passed on a party line vote. But since then, Republicans have made this kind of the staple of their platform, and they view it as key to electoral success.
Tim, you have a long list of what's going to go down today. What are some of the government services that won't be provided? Just share some of those with us.
Sure, and I've touched on a few, but for instance, the National Park Service is closing 401 of its sites, so that obviously applies to things like sightseeing and hiking. It also applies to the retirees and folks like that who essentially live at National Park Service, National Forest Service campsites. They have 48 hours now to relocate. The U.S. Geological Survey is canceling all of its long-term scientific research. The same goes for agencies like NOAA and the Environmental Protection Agency, which will no longer be able to regulate things like pesticides, which I think is something a lot of people care about. We've touched on the 400,000 Department of Defense civilian employees. There are even things that folks on the left side of the spectrum might be okay with, and conservatives would be really upset with. So, for instance, the Bureau of Land Management is no longer going to be giving out permits for oil and gas leases or new oil and gas exploration. The ARPA-E, which is this Department of Energy Advanced Research Project